All right. Hey, everyone. Yeah, we're good. We're good. Sorry. Three, reset. Cut, cut, cut. Come back. In three, two, one. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last lecture for juvenile justice. Like I said, this is a very short lecture compared to everything else. There's only 3 slides, and this is one of them. Because, yeah, we're talking about innovations in juvenile justice. And like I kind of teased in the intro, a lot of it is, reviewing, going over things that we've talked about over the course of the class. But we are going to talk a little bit about a couple other things that I think are important that we should address. Okay? And like I said, stuff that's in this PowerPoint and in this lecture are going to be relevant to the final exam. Okay? So let's dive in and talk very first about mobile apps. And I know this feels really weird to kind of say, but the reality is, and it's why I have a slide just for mobile apps, is because we live in 2025. And I know I'm not surprising anybody by telling you that, but the reality is we are technologically advanced. We have done so many things in the realm of personal technology that things are on a whole new level than we were 20 years ago. Like, I even think about it because, well, I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, so I remember 2005 very well. I mean, not as well as I remember yesterday, but I do remember 2005, and cell phones were in a very different state in 2005. I mean, I didn't get my first cell phone, I'll be honest, until 2007. So 2 years later, and I had this little Nokia brick. Was it my brick first, or was it my flip phone? I think it was my Nokia brick, and then I got my flip phone. Anyway, point is, mobile phones didn't have apps. They were just a phone that you could text and access the internet and rack up a whole bunch of data bills and have to then, explain to your parents why you have a $200+ cell phone bill. And yeah, long story short, phones have improved so much in 20 years. And not only have phones developed so much in 20 years, but all of our technology. It's why if you listen to any type of tech experts or people obsessed with the tech scene as it's happening will tell you that we are moving at a faster rate than we have historically with technology. We are getting rapidly quicker in advancements, which is why this is important to note that mobile apps are a wave of the future in juvenile justice and in innovations in criminal justice, because now we can use apps because we know, and this is a statistic, I'm trying to remember what study in particular it came from, but I teach an English Comp 2 class, and one of my students is talking about technology, addiction, and they actually cited this study that found that on average about 95% of all teenagers have a smartphone. And this is as of like 2023. So 95% of teens have a smartphone, which means they have access to apps. And so all of a sudden, if we're considering in juvenile justice ways that we can do an alternative to incarceration, that we want to consider electronic monitoring, maybe instead of the traditional electronic monitoring of having an ankle monitor that tracks your GPS, maybe we just have a mobile app that's installed on a kid's phone that they cannot delete. Yes, I know the obvious response is they just, get a different phone and keep it secret. And yeah, that's definitely a possibility. But the reality is we can use phone apps. We can develop applications that are designed to track behavior, to teach better engagement. We can use it for, as we talked about last time, telehealth actually has a purpose outside of being a crappy alternative to seeing a therapist. We can use that to give access to more people. So we can use mobile apps to track people. We can use it to track their GPS location, know where your kids are at all times. Not saying that we should all do that, because that's a weird state of mind that I don't like being in. But seriously, tracking and helping manage and teach behaviors, that's an incredible thing that we can do by creating an app and using apps on a phone, rather than, forcing kids to take time out of school, take them out and force them into different programs and places where they're lacking in other areas. Like, this is what's really cool. We can do way different things than we've done ever before. And we can also, because it's technology and it's terrifying, and I want to emphasize that, but we can gather data and provide information. I remind everyone that you live in now I'll say we do live in a post-truth era, and things are a little fuzzy right now with the internet and AI, and I'm not going to dive too much into that particular piece of it, but you have a majority of human knowledge at your fingertips. We all do. If you have a cell phone that has access to the internet, you can access almost every piece of information out there. Yes, there's a lot of things that haven't been digitized, but for the most part, you can get a huge chunk of human knowledge just by Googling, just by DuckDuckGoing, by Yahoo searching, by never Bing, but by Bing searching. You can find information. So we can use apps and cell phones to provide information for our clientele, for our juveniles who need that help before they get more involved in the justice system. And we can also use it to gather their data. What kind of websites are they visiting? What locations are they going to? We can use that to track behaviors and find out, is this what's leading to criminal activity or not? This is the beauty of the technology advances we've made. And now we get to talk about the elephant in the room, AI. And I want to talk about AI very specifically, okay? And I don't mean like I really want to talk about it. No, I want to talk about it in a very specific way. So, artificial intelligence is not a magic fix-all, but it is the genie is out of the bottle and we can't put it back in, okay? Artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. We've been using it in technology since the early 80s of computers. There's a difference between artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence. Generative AI is the thing that is being pushed right now as the primary focus. It can write your essays for you. It can create art pieces and videos and all this other stuff. That's generative AI. And generative AI is a bit of a problem. There's ethical concerns, and there's factual concerns, and concerns about longevity and effectiveness and things like that. And actually, if you follow any type of serious tech blog that's not just a tech bro that loves one of the main tech people, most of them are talking about the real ethical issues and the real deeper issues of artificial intelligence or generative AI. They're talking about the longevity. They're talking about the ethical concerns. They're talking about the environmental concerns. They're talking about the energy consumption. There's a lot of people that are experts in this area that are talking about some concerns about it. Not that we're trying to remove it or get rid of it or anything, but we're talking about how to make it work better. So I want to emphasize, generative AI is its own thing. That's not what we're talking about here with the mobile apps and with talking about juvenile justice. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is we're talking about the older traditional artificial intelligence models. These are exactly what they sound like. They are programmed models that they are given directives, they are told ways to respond, they're told exactly how to come about the answers they do, or how to do certain components, and they do it to a T exactly the way they are programmed to do. We can use, and we have been using, artificial intelligence to help with tracking cases, with loading and unloading files, with helping with developing certain components. Like, that's why I said artificial intelligence has been around since the 80s. We've made rudimentary AI programs to do a lot of things. For one, pretty much every video game ever has some kind of built-in artificial intelligence. We talked about it in gaming with enemy AI. We've been talking about that forever. But some of the earliest examples play chess. We built robots and programs to play chess. That's artificial intelligence. That's literally what it means. A fake intelligence, a programmed component. So, yeah, we've seen artificial intelligence in its earliest stages in the 80s, and it's getting better. That's why I say generative AI is a very different beast of artificial intelligence, and that's not what we're talking about. But the innovations that are made in that area, in the generative AI space, have helped the traditional artificial intelligence and has helped push it forward. So there are massive movements that have allowed technology to do things that, again, 20 years ago would have been completely unheard of. So a big innovation has been mobile technology. Heck, almost every phone has some kind of AI. If you have an iPhone, you have Siri. If you have a Google phone, you have Cortana, or if they changed the name, I don't remember what they changed it to, but they're there. Okay? So that's my big AI piece, and I was going to say spiel and piece put together, spiece. But yeah, this is mobile apps. And now I get to the last slide, but I want to mention there's more than what's just here. There's more that I want to talk about. So, other innovations that we have seen across the board typically have to do with ways we approach stuff, okay? So one of the big things that we have talked about before a bit is behavior modification. And because I feel like I need to give you a definition, because I can't help myself, but behavior modification is literally behaviors can be modeled using rewards and punishment. That's the basic system. Anybody who has been a parent or is a parent or remembers being a child and remembers, being rewarded for good behavior or punished for bad behavior, yeah, this is not something new. This is something that we've been doing for a very, very, very long time of human history. But we have made strides. And one of the ways that we've done that is through gamification. And that's that second term you see there. Gamification. Gamification. And I want to emphasize, gamification is something that is also not a new concept. It has been around for a decent amount of time. But I do want to give some credit towards gamification. And that is, it learned early on that it works at all levels. It doesn't just work with kids. I want to say that as far as juvenile justice is concerned, and as far as juvenile psychology is concerned, we find that gamifying a lot of mundane, everyday things actually does help the science of our brains. It's why actually it's not just for kids, because if you've ever tried dieting, there are some diet apps out there that try to do things like achievements and experience and try to treat it like a game. That's gamification, making a game out of something. So the actual definition for gamification is using points badges, and leaderboards to motivate and sustain desirable behaviors. And so that's the reality of gamification. We want to create as much of the mundane into a game as possible. And so what this ends up looking like in the most traditional sense is educational programs and games. Again, if you grew up, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, heck, even the late 80s, early 90s, you might remember certain computer games that were educational games. I'm not necessarily saying Freddy Fish, but, those types of computer games there where you can learn things. The typing games that existed, there's so many of them. And I'm forgetting, all of them now, but I did play a lot of them growing up, that kind of thing. They were meant to teach you real skills, typing, how to use the computer, math, things like that, but they did it in a way that was fun, that you earned points, badges, and all that other stuff. That was the fun stuff. That was the cool stuff to it. So, yeah, we rely on games. And the cool thing specifically I want to say about gamification for juvenile justice is that a game can recreate social situations that requires decision making. We don't have to use a game that already exists or a specific board game or computer game. We can make our own situations and games. We can use games to teach certain behaviors. That's the beauty of it. That really is what I get excited about, is that I'll put it to you this way. The reason I'm excited to talk about gamification is my third master's is in education. So I do have a master's in criminal justice, I have a master's in English, and I have a master's in secondary education, so 7th through 12th grade. And one of the things that I learned in my teaching program was I learned about the different ways to engage students. And I wrote, my thesis in education is on gamification. And specifically, my focus was on using non-traditional educational sources as education. I was talking the very basics of gamification outside of educational games. So using popular video games and alternatives and alternative media as ways to engage your students. Even going as far, mind you, when I was writing about it, TikTok was still in its infancy, but I was talking about using YouTube videos as ways to engage your students, as ways to get them excited about learning something. You approach them at their level. And that's what gamification tries to do. It takes the fun and the excitement that people get from gaming, whether that be digital gaming through video games or board games, card games, heck, Dungeons and Dragons. I run Dungeons and Dragons sessions for my friends. I've had a student in the past before talk about they run Dungeons and Dragons sessions, and they actually use it for students with behavioral issues because it helps them work through their feelings in the proper, appropriate ways to address those things. So gamification is this really cool thing, and it has an application in a lot of different areas, especially education and especially in juvenile justice, because if we can get those types of scenarios in a setting that is safe, that allows kids to learn what is the right way and the wrong way to respond, that's even better. That's the goal. So this is why I say gamification is this really cool thing. Like I said, it's been around for a long time, but it's really gotten popularity since the rise of educational games in the 90s and up until the 2000s. So it's something that I want to at least mention and give some focus to. So obviously, regardless of how we gamify things, whether it's educational programs and games or others, we want to make sure that they're interactive and engaging. If it's just boring, it's not going to work. But the other thing, and perhaps one of the most important aspects, and we're going to come back to this concept in a tiny little bit too, is empathy building. So one thing that we have found in a lot of juveniles that are involved in the juvenile justice system is there is an issue of empathy. And I don't mean that there's no empathy or there's too much. I mean, they don't know how to properly regulate or empathize with other individuals. So we need to teach empathy. And so that's something that we can do through gamification. That's something we can do as behavior modification. And I'm going to give you a little tease. This is something that we don't need to just do with juveniles. We also need to do this with adults. And we're going to get to that here in just a moment. So, transitioning to electronic monitoring. This is just a fun fact. This is something that a lot of people don't really realize when we talk about electronic monitoring. Most people know it's been around for a long time because, well, it's in like every single cop drama, show, movie, etc. So we know it's been around a long time, but the funny thing is its origins are earlier than a lot of people realize. So electronic monitoring actually began in the 1960s. It wasn't fully used in the way that we understand it today until the 1980s, which is why we're familiar with them and we feel like they've been around forever, is because they started getting really popular in the 80s. They were fully used in probation in the 80s, and so we saw that in Hollywood and in movies in the 1980s to 90s. So that's why it's been there. But the 1960s, if you want to take a guess why the 1960s, that's because of NASA, actually. So, no joke. In the 1960s, NASA was fully booming and the space race was going on. We were sending men and women up into space in spaceships. But we were able to monitor their position in real time. And people in the field were like, wait, they're able to monitor the position of people thousands of miles away. Can we do that with people who are formerly incarcerated or incarcerated and are being released? And so the early stages of electronic monitoring started because of NASA, and that's why I said it starts in the 60s, gets fully implemented in the 80s in the way that we understand now. And yeah, we've modified it a bit since then, but yeah, electronic monitoring started all the way back in the 1960s. That's a fun fact. That's one of those things that would be a bonus point, not a major question. Anyway, so in keeping with the other content here and talking about innovations, I want to talk about social media. Okay? So social media, we understand it. We talk about it. I feel like it's talked to death for the most part, and I feel like most of you are familiar with social media in one way, shape, or form. One of the things I usually like to ask people is, hey, what's a social media app in your opinion? What do you consider a social media app? And so the usual ones I get, especially recently, are TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, Discord, Facebook, Twitter, X. I refuse to call it X, it's Twitter. But those are the ones I tend to hear. Rarely do I hear anyone say Twitch or YouTube, but every once in a while it comes up, and they are weirdly social media. But I want you to consider that, yeah, these are all different forms of social media, ways that people can engage with each other in a multimedia format. But now I want to take this that next step. So our text also mentions that 95% roughly of teens have access to a smartphone. Of that 95%, 90% report using social media. So we do know that a majority of young adults are using social media. And when we talk about social media, we tend to hear about it in one of two ways. We either hear the great capabilities of social media, of, having influence, of, being able to post everything, about being able to become famous and make money off of it, sharing ideas, finding community. We hear that stuff. Or we hear the negative side. We hear it's led to higher rates of depression and anxiety and even suicide rates in teens, which, yeah, that's true. We also, hear about cyberbullying. We hear about exploitation. We hear about grooming. Like, we hear the good and the bad of social media often. Usually it's one or the other. But it's important to note that social media is not inherently bad. It's the what you do with it and your mental state. It's a whole complicated web, and I don't want to try to break it apart, because what I want to focus on in particular when we're talking about innovations and why we're talking about this in juvenile justice is social media allows people to engage with each other and find community. Heck, I can guarantee that you can find groups of people who are involved in illegal activities on social media. Heck, I know for a fact that a good number of TikTok quote-unquote life hacks are literally things like fraud and whatnot. Which, not even going to dive into that. But, criminal behavior can be shown on any of these things, on any of these platforms, and can help people find each other and group together, for better or worse. And the other part of social media and the internet in general is there's a level of anonymity that one can have. When you make most of these things, you might have to put in information, but there are ways that you can put in false information or somebody else's information. Not a lot of them have a strong verification method other than put in your phone or your email. You can make an email in 5 minutes on just about any website, and most times you don't even have to put in valid information to make it. So if that's the only way of verifying an account is real, you make a fake email with fake information and then make a fake account on a social media site where you're somebody who you're not, you have that anonymity. That's the reality of the internet. It's a whole weird psychology, and I'm not going to dive into the anonymity or the disconnect between the human. But do know that social media can have an impact on juvenile justice. And one thing in particular that our book mentions, and why I feel like I should also be talking about it, is we do know that lower income families tend to rely more heavily on smartphones for internet access. Computers are expensive. Smartphones are expensive, but I'm going to be real honest with you. You can get a Boost Mobile smartphone for $120, and that's about $300 cheaper than a decent laptop. And I mean decent, not great level, decent level laptop. We do know traditionally, and this also has to do with internet access in general versus data, which is a whole nother problem, but we do know that more people have phones than they have computers. This is a reality. And we know that lower income families, especially those who don't have great access to internet, oftentimes will have a cell phone that has data access so they can still access the internet, because unfortunately a majority of things in today's world operate with the internet. So we have to make sure that we have that access, and so it becomes this unfortunate, quick way to learn about and become engaged with illegal activities. So, yeah, social media is something that needs to be considered and talked about. And of course, because I'm talking about issues of the interwebs, or the internet, as I like to call it, the interwebs, we need to talk about digital literacy. Digital literacy is something that's very important that, unfortunately, a good chunk of people in today's world struggle with. especially here in the United States. I'm not saying it's not everywhere, but in the United States, we have a general issue of digital literacy issues. Being able to verify factuality and validness of information, how to distinguish fact from fiction, how to analyze a work, how to appropriately engage with content. These are things that, if we're being taught, we're not being taught it well. But I feel more secure in saying that we're not really teaching this. And this is a problem. We live in a time where misinformation is almost as prevalent, if not more prevalent, than fact. And it has to do with the anonymity of the internet. It has to do with the availability. But now more than ever, we need better digital literacy. And so it's important to note that, this is something that can impact anyone. As I kind of jokingly said before when we talked about social media and I said TikTok, there are TikTokers that talk about life hacks, and a good number of them are either illegal or are things like fraud. And there are people that go, hey, that's a really cool life hack, and then they do it. Because people don't realize what it actually is. And so then you get involved in the justice system because you broke the law. This is important. I'm not saying everything you see on the internet is a lie, and I'm not saying everything that you can find on the internet is truth. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you need to be better. And I don't mean you as in you, a specific student. I mean you, the general public, including myself. We all need to be better at this. This is something that, especially with the rise of generative AI, is becoming more difficult in some senses. In other senses, now you can still tell. But this is an important aspect. And I do know we do teach digital literacy here at EC3. This is not a plug to take that class. I encourage you to, but it's not a plug. I'm just saying, this is how important it is that we have a class on it. That should tell you something. So, my big takeaway about this is be conscientious about the internet. That's it, I guess. But as far as innovations are concerned in regards to juvenile justice, yeah. We know that there is billions of websites that have information. We want to make sure that we are prepared and we have the right information. Innovation-wise, yeah, we've made huge strides. We now have access to billions of websites. All right. So, my last thing that I want to talk about is not going to be on the exam, so it's not on the presentation at all. But it does go back to one of the things that I was talking about with behavior modification, and I talked about empathy with our juvenile offenders. And this is where I get to go. I want to briefly talk about careers. So, careers in juvenile justice, the question I say is, what do you want to do? And for some people, it's, I want to be a juvenile probation officer. I want to work with kids who are in the system, who are getting out and need guidance. Great. That's one option. I want to be a juvenile officer in a detention facility. Okay, that's another option. I want to be a juvenile lawyer. I want to be a juvenile judge. I want to, whatever it may be, if it is in the juvenile justice system, I got to tell you a couple things. The first thing is it's interdisciplinary. And I know I gave you a big word without putting it on the screen. Interdisciplinary. And all that means is that it's not one discipline. It's not one area of education alone. It's not just criminal justice. And that's something we've talked about this entire class. Literally, juvenile justice, because you're dealing with kids, people who are not fully formed, who are still learning, who are still adjusting, you tend to spend a lot of time in psychology. And that's something that I'm going to tell you right now. If you plan on going into a career in juvenile justice, you're going to have to take psych. You're going to have to do a lot of psychology, more than you do for any traditional criminal justice work. So get used to psychology. I don't know. There's no better way to say that, really. Psychology is an important part, and it's an important interdisciplinary thing. Juvenile judges, we've talked about this before. They tend to be interdisciplinary. They are judges. They studied law, but they also tend to have a background in child psychology, understanding the way kids act and behave. That's important. So yeah, interdisciplinary. The other thing that we have, apologies, I have a street sweeper coming through. The other thing that we have with in careers, and I want to mention this right now, and it's not just juveniles, it's all careers in criminal justice. There is a push, not just from like lawmakers, but from administrators, at least here in the Erie County area and in the Pennsylvania state area. There is a push in criminal justice for more empathy training. So this is where I tell you, part of our job as a community college is to work with community members to make sure that what we are teaching is what the field wants. And one thing that happened at our most recent advisory committee meeting with community members here in Pennsylvania and Erie County in particular, in talking about criminal justice, one of the biggest things they talked about is empathy training. That too many officers at the police level all the way up to the prison level have a serious need for more empathy training. And they even went as far as to say that there are some individuals who are in probation that also need more empathy training. I do want to emphasize this was before a fairly recent case with an individual that involved a probation officer. We're not going to dive into that. That's a whole nother mess. That's something for criminal law class, not this class. But I do want to mention, like, these are the types of things that the people in charge are saying we need more training. So I want to emphasize, no matter what career you go into, if it's in criminal justice or if it's in juvenile justice in particular, empathy is something that they are looking for right now because they're seeing more issues because of a lack of empathy. I'm not saying you have to always empathize with somebody, but it's understanding the situations that people are in. So empathy is a big push right now. Literacy is another one. Much like digital literacy, we're also talking about being able to write and have conversation. But I wanted to talk about the empathy because it's related to behavior modification. But that being said, that's it. That's the end of our last lecture. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for sticking it out with me. As I said in the intro video, this is it. Your final exam is due by Sunday at the latest. Your program proposal is due by Sunday at the latest. And yeah, I thank you for sticking it out. Keep up the good work. Good luck on the final exam. And hopefully, I'll see you again.